because they're amazing. I will let you guys kind of tell your story and share with everyone. But if anybody has any questions, I have to say Rachael and Adam are the most giving people. They're always available to answer questions, whether big or small. So please don't hesitate to reach out to them, and they'll provide you with their contact info. So if you do have questions, whether it's now or in the future, they would love to help you. So Rachael and Adam, I will let you guys take it away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thanks for having us. We have a presentation prepared, but just kind of informally, Adam and I are twins, and we started our law firm about 3 years ago, really focusing on the areas of real estate development, government relations, and sort of everything in between. And we really spend a lot of time working with realtors because, as Adam, will elaborate, you guys are kind of the first line of defense. A lot of people think developers and investors know everything, but they generally ask their realtor, who then, if we're lucky, knows us, so that we can jump in and help. But we're gonna present some information to give you guys some resources and talk a little bit about zoning and land use, give you guys updates on kind of the current status of things in Philadelphia, and then like Dana said, just really open for any questions, and we will provide you with our contact information. I usually give out my cell too. It's never a bother if you text me, call me. We genuinely love to help, and are just really excited to be able to share some information today. You have anything to add, Adam?
No, I think that summarized it really well. And like Dana said, we are always open for discussions and stuff. It's good for us if you know what to look for. It helps us a lot. So we're always open to sharing that information. So let me just, sorry, I'm multitasking. Want to get the slides going. Can everybody see my screen just to start before I? All right,
You just click present.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see where that is.
Just view present.
Oh, maybe because view. I don't know why it's usually there. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it. Oh, you know why? It's over here. Do you know where it is, Rach? Not sure why it's
in
not.
View. I don't know what.
Well, we can go like this. It's fine for now.
Well, why don't I just do it then?
Okay, thanks.
You have to not share.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Rach. That's
Sorry.
Twins for you. Okay, you can present.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, it's just loading.
Yep.
Okay. Good? Okay, cool. So, Adam, you want to?
Yeah, I would just say when you're thinking about like maybe a need, or you have a question from a client, somebody who's either not as sophisticated or a developer, and you're seeing value adds, what we'll try to always do is help you guys see, what you may be looking for, because ultimately, I think it's a relationship driven business for all of us, and it's all about trust and value add, and being able to know where the best place is, where the risks are highest, and how to help, and where we can possibly help you guys and make you look good is really our focus. So we've built this, it's a boutique law firm specifically in the realm of zoning, land use, government relations, real estate, and development. The type of legal services we provide go towards that. So where we like to help, we're soup to nuts on your real estate deal. We have great attorneys, great staff, and our experience and political experience, which Rachael will dive into. So we're talking about, we're usually there when we're talking about feasibility, what should I do for a project, or what can I do, to negotiations, reviews of leases, draftings of leases, operating agreements, forming that LLC to mitigate your risk, all the way through to the variance process if it's needed, the permits you might need to file, applying for tax abatements, which has been really important, especially when we're not dealing with, our typical architecture teams. Some of that stuff tends to go awry, and we'd rather catch it earlier. So we'll go into that in a little bit. All the way down to litigation. Unfortunately, it happens. There's breach of contracts, construction damage, things like that. So we've set up to be the full soup to nuts team for your real estate issues, basically.
And just to touch on, a lot of what you guys work on and deal with, revolves around the city. And we sort of built this business leveraging our political relationships. I worked in city council for Alan Dom for 2 years, right when he was in office, legislating for him, and really just spent time trying to understand how the city works. I always tell people, it's not that I know everything, I just know who to ask a lot of the time. And so that's sort of what we also want to share for you is, even if you think we might not know, either we'll try to figure out, we might know it, or we'll try to get you to someone who does, because we'd like to solve problems. And a lot of times it's just figuring out, who do I need to get the answer I need. And so we deal with a lot of the city agencies, L&I, OPA, revenue, the land bank, we do public property acquisition, city council, and many others. And so we utilize that a lot to solve problems and kind of cut through the fat of dealing with government. Our specialty is really zoning and land use. Like Adam said, we do practice all areas of real estate law, but I specialize specifically in zoning and land use. If those who aren't exactly familiar what it is, this is a map of the city. This is their actual zoning map of the city. A lot of the yellow is the low density residential. I know people are probably very familiar with RSA 5 or RSA 3. As you can see, most of our city is low density residential. The purple is industrial, the red is commercial mixed use. The deeper reds are your CMX 3s and 4s and 5s. Obviously green is parks, but an orange that you could kind of barely see is your RM1 multifamily. So the reason that we have such a robust practice with zoning and land use is because a lot of the city is zoned kind of in ideal for either what the market is dictating, what investors are looking for, what banks will lend to. And so where we really jump in is helping to kind of analyze that, see what the feasibility in consideration of, you and your client's timeline, the cost factors, and really what we call it a feasibility study, what it lends itself to as far as what other projects have gotten approved. What does the data say? How does this align with the city's goals? Where are the local community groups at? Because as some of you who may be involved in some of the variances, it can be controversial. So each zoning classification, anywhere from RSA 5 all the way up to CMX 5, ICMX, I2, IRMX, has different rules that come with it. And those rules really relate to what a property can be used for, whether it's single family, multifamily, a hospital, daycare, different commercial uses. Then the dimensional characteristics. How tall can the building be? How far does it have to be set back from the street? Can you do off-street parking? Can I do, how high can I go? Can I do a roof deck? What are the parameters of a roof deck? How far do you have to set things back? It also dictates available bonuses. There's a lot of times that because people just don't follow legislation, or they're keeping up with so many other things, that they don't realize that sometimes you can get height and density bonuses. As of right, there's some extra procedural steps, but you might be able to qualify for bonuses. Sometimes it's a payment in lieu of providing something like affordable housing. Sometimes you have to meet certain criteria, like the green roof density bonus. And so sometimes it's important to also know what, bonuses are available to you, so that maybe you can avoid the variance route. Also, there's overlays. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going into that. The best way to kind of get a first base feel on this is atlas.phila.gov. I know most people are familiar with that. If you're not, play around with it. You can type in any property and pull up a lot of this information.
Yeah, and one thing I would say is, we do
Sure.
webinars every Thursday on different topics, but if there's anything this group specifically wants, like each one of those bullet points, Rachel and I can talk on for an entire session. So if there's something that's specifically coming up over and over again, we'd be happy to share on any of those. But I just want to state, I know she's breezing over some things relatively quickly. And if there's anything specifically, just let us know.
Yeah, and we'll take any questions that you have at the end too. Even if it's property specific. I really, it's funny, people say, well, what if, and I'm like, well, what's the address? Let me just look it up for you, tell it, you know, so I'm happy to give really hands-on feedback. But to Adam's point, and we do have, and it should be posted soon, there was one we did an RSA 5 to RM1 conversions. That's probably the most common. I'm going to go through 2 examples, but again, it's really about what's the goal of what they want to build or your client wants to build, or existing structures. These relate to existing structures. It's not all about new construction, additions, all that's included as well. So a lot of times we get asked, well, what if I want to do something that is outside of what the use is allowed? Again, most common is probably multifamily from a single family use. Or if I want to, you know, build something dimensions wise, that's different. Some examples, like I said, RSA 5 to multifamily. If a property is owned industrial, we're seeing that a lot, especially around, you know, the Somerset area, Port Richmond, Kensington. There's a lot of these industrial sites on Lehigh Avenue, depending on what areas you all focus on, where you can only do industrial, but there's really no market for it at this point. Or another example dimensionally is there's lots that are oddly shaped. There's RSA 5 lots, and we'll talk about this a little, that are 3,000 square feet, that are 25 feet wide. You can't subdivide them, but putting a single family home, it would just be so large that there's no market for it, there's no comps, and multifamily would be a better play. There's also stuff where, for example, with existing structures, you have a client who wants to put an addition on, you know, say it's a 3-story structure, but the way that they originally built it out, the second and third floor are kind of like a lot shorter than the first floor, or one of the floors is shorter. Sometimes when you add on that addition, you kind of mess up your open space ratio. You either have to provide in certain, most commonly either 75% lot coverage or 80%. And so there's a lot of times where variances like that are not a big deal dimensionally, but you don't even realize you're going to trigger that depending on the architect you're working on. What's the solution? The first thing we like to say is if we can do a feasibility analysis for you, or we can spend, you know, 30 minutes to an hour, really understanding what the goals are and what you're looking at and the limitations of the existing lot, we can provide you with a really honest analysis of, hey, listen, we either think this is a good project, here's what you should consider, here's what you might not know about this neighborhood group, here's realistically the time frame, here's other projects we've gotten approved. And remember that with any feasibility analysis, if we say it's a go, we have to deliver on our end. So I'm not selling you some idea of what would be good, because again, I have to implement the strategy and the solution. Your other option is a variance. There's some people who just know they have to go for a variance regardless, so we can talk through strategy, timeline, and things like that. And then again, I mentioned bonuses. You might be able to get the density or height without a variance. For example, I got a call a couple months ago from someone who was wanted to build a multifamily building in Fishtown. It was RM1, so they legally could do it as of right. However, they were like 106 square feet short of an extra 6 unit. So they said, you know, we really need the 6 unit to make it work. You know, would you take this through the variance process? And what I said was, no, it's RM1. Let's go get you a bonus. You're going to pay X amount in lieu. It's a calculation based on square footage of the lot. You actually spend less money going to get this bonus. You'll get the permit quicker. You'll qualify for the abatement faster. And you actually were able to get an additional 2 units. And you're not going to have to spend the time and money going through the variance process. So there's a lot of times where there could be some other solutions outside of going through a variance. Here's just a typical variance example. This is a project. This is actually the first project that we ever did as a firm. And I remember thinking like, oh, this will be easy. This was anything but easy, but this was a single family lot, RSA 5. It was 25 feet wide by I think 113 or 16 feet deep, oddly shaped. It kind of had an L-shaped bump out in the back. All that was allowed on this lot is one single family home, no accessory off-street parking access by a front street. I'm sure many of you have projects where people want parking, but they don't want to have a curb cut because then you're going to take off-street parking away or on-street parking away. And really what we ended up getting for this structure was 6 units, 9 parking spaces. So the value add of something like this, where we spent about, I think this is probably an 8 or 9 month project. Ground up new construction obviously takes a lot longer than existing structures, but you can see the value add here, where you would have walked in, a client would have purchased something, you know, vacant lot, they only could build 1 home. Well, this was almost a 5,000 square foot lot. You're not building one single family home here. You're not going to do a duplex. You're not going to do a triplex. So this is what we ended up with. Another example more commonly that we see, this was a regular lot. This is in North 25th Street near a little north of Brewerytown. This is just a typical 16 by 65 or 68 foot lot. Nothing special about this lot, not really giant, not oddly shaped. We ended up getting a duplex here. A single family home here just didn't make sense for the client. It would have been, almost a $450,000 single family home where there really wasn't a market for it. So we see these most commonly. And again, this was new construction. If you can't tell, it's this one right here.
And maybe you just want to share on, and I know you're going to get to it, but explaining, if we see something like this, when do we feel, a hardship is actually meritorious versus, when it just doesn't make sense.
So for variances, the Zoning Board of Adjustment looks at, a legal standard, which is called a hardship argument. Basically, why can't you comply with the code? Is the lot really big? Is the topography of it, meaning like, is there a steep slope? Is it shaped in a weird way that makes it so that putting, what's required by the code very difficult? That's really the standard. I mean, that was obvious for a property like this, where, like I said, it was 25 feet by over 110 feet deep, oddly shaped. Even if we were to subdivide it up the middle, you would have now two really skinny long lots that wouldn't make sense. In projects like this, your hardship is more financial. It's really that the client said the market for putting almost a $500,000 home in a neighborhood like this doesn't really make sense. He also, some clients you get, their model is, build and hold. So they don't want to build a single family home to just sell it. They want to build up their portfolio. They want to rent. So that was kind of for him, it was more so he wanted to keep it, and also single family made no sense for him. There was no hardship argument here, it was financial. So the way that we explain to a client timeline, what the issues are going to be, how to really sell this in a way is a lot different on this project than this project. And that's some of that feasibility analysis that we talk through with you guys and with your clients, is making sure that you want to go through what's called the variance process, the entitlement risk, and understanding what the objections might be, what the temperament and the receptiveness of this might be in certain
I think it's
neighborhoods.
fair to say it's not black and white. So while the legislation specifically says, and you do specifically need a hardship, again, Rachel is thinking of 15 to 30 different factors that might play in, and one of those may be the temperament of the community, because they do play a large role in it. And like she said, the board's not always caring truthfully, and in the legislation says about financials, like it's not, financials aren't necessarily a hardship, but again, like we're dealing with people and boards, and there's some compromise when it's very clear what either based on the 2035 plan, comprehensive plan, what they want, that it might just not make sense to have that single family home, or it really can't be built in the next and done so effectively and profitably for the next 20 years maybe. So a lot of things to take into account when you're thinking of these things. I was just gonna say, if you can't think of a hardship argument necessarily, like that's where we really enjoy getting into the feasibility analysis, because Rachel will always think about how does it get done, not if it gets done. So there's usually an argument.
It's not really if you can get something done, it's how you go about it. And a lot of it also has to take into consideration, the appetite that the developer, investor, owner, anybody really integrally involved has for the time frame, the cost associated with it. But a lot of times, again, because we get involved to implement whatever strategy I come up with, I'm not going to sell you on something that I don't think can be done, or if I can tell that there's a lack of patience or comfort level with what we would need to do to get it done, then obviously we don't go that route. But again, it's not a one size fits all, but obviously projects like the bigger project that we showed before, that was a lot easier. Although I will tell you, this project was way more controversial in the response we got from the community than this one was. But I've seen other projects where something like that, they're like, okay, we're good with that, and they hate something like this. So it just depends on the neighborhood. Just some quick questions that we get a lot about zoning. Again, what's the best way to determine what you can build? We do, again, feasibility analysis is the best way. Take a look through Atlas, check out the zoning archives, see if there's other properties on the block that have gotten similar approvals. We collect a lot of data in our office, so we have a running list of every single variance that's ever been approved in the last 3 years, organized by a bunch of features, including, location, council, office, community group, if it's a corner, if it's a middle, size of the lot, how it aligns with the city's 2035 comprehensive plan, which if you're not familiar with, just Google it. It kind of lays out, the city is 10 districts. It boils it down into 18 smaller ones. It kind of lays out what the city, the planning commission, the council offices, and the community groups kind of ideally would like for the area. It doesn't always make sense what they want. There's times where they'll just want like public parks everywhere on private land. That obviously doesn't make sense, but it gives you a feel for what they're going for, where the commercial corridors are. How long does it take to get a variance? If we weren't in this pandemic environment where some of the city agencies are closed, new construction is, I would say, anywhere between 7 to 9 months. Obviously, if it is 50 or more units, we trigger what's called civic design review, which requires additional layers of city administrative review from an architectural and design perspective. So we just did one, we did 278 units on an ICMX lot, which you can do no residential. That project took well over a year just for zoning entitlement, just for getting the zoning approvals. Smaller projects, existing structures, for example, a single family home that you want to convert to a triplex is generally a 6-month process. Again, we'll go into a status update of where the city agencies are, but generally that's the time frame. What does the process entail? We can go through that at a later date, sort of very in detail. I know we're going to do a seminar on it, but generally it starts with an L&I submission, with laying out how many units you want, where they are, things of that nature. Again, new construction, you have to provide zoning schematic plans from an architect. If you want parking, things of that nature. L&I shoots back a refusal, you appeal it to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. There's a round of community involvement and community meetings. And then ultimately you end up in front of the Zoning Board of Adjustment, who makes the final determination of whether your variance is approved or not. And it's sort of this very long, drawn out process, most time of which you're waiting on the city. So again, when you are analyzing these with your clients, you have to make sure you have an appetite time-wise. And a lot of times people don't realize or consider, I know the city doesn't, there's money behind all this. So if people are using hard money on a project, it might make sense to just do a rehab and keep it moving, unless the value add is that good, or they have no other choice. What's the cost of it? That it depends. We do a lot of cases flat fee. It's around 25 hours worth of work. So depending on the level of difficulty, if there's precedent for what you're trying to get approved on that block or nearby, or if there's a higher level of collaboration between myself and the owner or developer, meaning they're willing to door knock, they're willing to help get community support. They either already have a good reputation in the neighborhood where we're going to get less pushback. It becomes less of an adversarial process. And I always take all of that into consideration. And what type of properties are ideal going through the variance process? I wish it was cookie cutter and I could give you a list. But again, if you see something and you say, like, not just financially, this doesn't make sense, that's something to consider, but more so like either, let's say it's on a commercial corridor, it's next to a bunch of multifamily. It has a history of being multifamily or commercial. It's a bigger lot that we can't chop up. Things like that, they're kind of obvious. A lot of times, you can kind of sniff out whether there's a little bit of a hardship. And if you can make a decent argument that, it wouldn't be completely out of character for what you want to propose, then a lot of times we can get that done. We kind of just also wanted to go through some other stuff that you guys should consider when you're involved with zoning or even dealing with different clients. And again, like our goal, as Dana said, is really to just be a resource, so you can have someone to ask, so that when the client comes to you and says, hey, we're negotiating the LOI, the letter of intent, or I have an agreement of sale, you guys always deal with the agreement of sale, consider, oh, maybe we can get a zoning contingency, or maybe, if there's a pending tax abatement that didn't go through, I know what we could do an escrow agreement so that we can still close it. It's just to give you guys some other solutions and options. So Adam, you'll go through.
Yeah, and I would just say, let's start with LOIs, for example. Those are just spelling out either the terms of a deal or the terms of a partnership. There's times, right, that there's a partnership done between developers and they don't necessarily have a property yet, so they don't have to go all the way through. forming the LLC, forming, getting and executing an operating agreement, because for different reasons, like going with different lenders, lenders are usually looking into those operating agreements and making sure they're very specific to properties. So a lot of times we'll have people come in with operating agreements that are very general, not realizing that, when we're thinking about these things, we're thinking about how it's going to affect, the eventual financing of a project and what that's going to entail. So a lot of times, an LOI will just let you sit out the terms between partners, and then when the time comes, there's actually a deal on the table, because like you all know, there's a negotiation process and closing process that takes some time.
Maybe you guys aren't always involved that early in it, but at least if you have an understanding of the basics of it and kind of the flow of it, you'll be able to kind of line up your timeline for finding properties and things like that.
Yeah, and when maybe to tell somebody to go get that LLC, and the fact is that when you form an LLC, with a property, it mitigates the risk to the individual, and if you have a portfolio, it mitigates the risk, depending on how many you have, to other properties. So a lot of times, we've had people come who have many properties under one company. Well, the issue with that is that if you do have an issue like a breach of contract or something wrong, something happens on your end, like an issue, right? Or you're involved in an issue, they can go after all the properties. A lot of times, we like to get in there early and start creating these LLCs and operating agreements for each property, because the way the transfer tax laws work in Pennsylvania, it's actually, even if you're transferring a property you have individually to an LLC that you own, there's a transfer tax there because it's actually considered a completely separate entity. And you don't know, I don't think anybody in their pro forma ever thinks about paying transfer tax twice. We already have one that's high enough. Just quickly, with agreements of sale, zoning contingencies, like specifically, there might be times where you can negotiate a premium price that's for a property with a seller based on the fact that if they allow you to add a zoning contingency so that you're not actually, committing until there is a zoning approval, it may be worth the risk to the seller, instead of getting a deal or paying on a single family, to actually get that premium. If in fact the variance is successful and you can get a multi-unit. Escrow agreements right now are very
Just
relevant.
also quick on zoning contingencies. There's a lot of times where if you're not familiar with how long the zoning process takes, you'll have a client who enters into a 30 or 60 or 90-day zoning contingency. Well, even for a project that you don't have to go through a variance that's as of right, I don't know any project that moves through the city that quickly. So it's important to understand your time frames so that you can help eliminate the amount of risk that your client has. Not every seller will allow for a zoning contingency, but to Adam's point, if you offer them a premium, you're paying a premium, or if you're paying for what the property could be used for, but not what it currently is, that's a really good time. And a lot of times you'll find sellers who are motivated to wait and be patient because they're getting a lot more money. And again, it also gives you some leverage, like, hey, I know that you are selling this and we think we're going to be able to do multifamily, but right now it's a single family lot. So if you want us to pay X, we're going to need some leverage on your end and some time to get that done.
Yep. With escrow agreements, again, every one of these points we could talk for an hour or so about, and we'd be happy to do so. But escrow agreements right now,
people would fall asleep if we talked for an hour.
Escrow agreements right now are specifically relevant because of the closures of our local government and those agencies being able to push certain things through. So, the ones we most commonly see are with abatements that are pending. So you've sent in either on time or you're going through a nunc-pro-tunc, which Rachel will talk about, for a late filing, as well as if you have violations on the property that you just can't resolve right now because there's nobody to speak with, even if it's something that you've either fixed or is a small issue that's really not related to the safety of the property or something like that. Right now, what we're doing is creating these specialty escrow agreements that will essentially allow you to basically contract out, how that stuff is going to be taken care of, when it's going to be taken care of, and then we'll hold the escrow because it's not really a title issue. So they typically won't hold these escrow funds. So determinations about, when and if you're going to receive a tax abatement, we'll put together a memorandum calculating based on our understanding and experience, what the tax liability might be if the tax payment isn't successful, hold it under some rules of time, and then at that point, it'll either go back to the seller if the abatement's reached, or to the buyer in the event it's not. So,
and that way you can still close on the property without having to kind of wait until either the abatement's processed or you find out if your appeal was successful. Even like Adam said, we've done it on more minor things. We helped someone in the beginning of this pandemic where there was a violation on a fence. There was an 8-foot high fence. You're only allowed to have a 6-foot fence. And they were, without us coming up with this specialty agreement as to the amount of money that was getting put aside and the time frame for accomplishing it, they weren't going to be able to close on the property. And you had a seller who really wanted to sell the property and a buyer who really wanted it. So this is a solution that title companies don't often come up with, again, because it's not a title issue. So you guys can still close and move forward and know that this is handled. And we work with you and are responsible for a lot of times even helping to get it resolved. We do a lot of times where we also, represent the seller and make sure that you get your abatement or the violations resolved, things like that.
Yep. And I think one thing to state about the violations is people sometimes also think that's black and white. I get a bill, or I have a violation on my property and, I'm screwed. And if I don't resolve that, that's not always the case. You may have actually a hardship about it, or they are just wrong in the liens that they've put on the property. And the city's always willing to negotiate. I would say, not every time, but a lot of times we can get, if you have there's a very high tax lien for unpaid taxes. There's a lot of times we're able to compromise because the city knows it's better to get 50 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, we've worked with a lot of people to help resolve liens and violations. And if anyone isn't familiar, the best place to find out if there are violations on a property is actually not on Atlas. It's on the L&I website. If you just type in L&I Philadelphia, you'll see on the bottom left, sort of the middle of the page, it says property history. You could type in any property and see all the open violations that they have. A lot of times it doesn't come up on a title report for whatever reason. So it's a good place for you to also add value to say, hey, by the way, do you know that this, and a lot of these violations, depending on what your client wants to do, again, if it's a rehab or whatever, they get resolved just by transferring the ownership and having someone rehab the property. But just to know that extra information is important. Just a bit on licenses and permits. A lot of people know the city requires licenses and permit submissions for new construction, rehabs, additions. And so you really want to make sure that, you're aware of that, your client's aware of that, and that you can make sure that when if you represent, the buyer, that the seller may represent to them, for example, oh, it's a legal triplex. Well, we look on Atlas and there's no zoning history and no record of it. A lot of times what we do is I'll say to people, at least go pull a city cert. Sometimes lenders require that anyways for financing. It's like the city charges like $112, I think, and like 50 cents or something like that. And that will show you what the last record of it was. A lot of times, you don't want to take someone's word for it. You want to make sure that there's real documents. And again, you can always get that filed as well to kind of help your client out. Also, a housing rental license is required for every single rental unit. So if you are dealing with multifamily and you're representing a buyer or even a seller, and there's no active housing rental licenses of property and there's active tenants in there, or they're going to put tenants in that, that's important for you to be able to know, because in the event that they're not in place, sometimes it can be a headache to get them in place. And you want to also make sure that everything is legal and lined up correctly.
Yeah,
and if you guys own investment properties, that's important for you to know as well.
Yeah, it can certainly open you up to liabilities, because even if the event, let's say that you need to evict, you have a client that's not, you have a tenant that's not paying. Well, if you don't have your rental suitability licenses and you haven't done all of the requirements by legislative requirements, you actually, don't have the footing, because you've been essentially illegally renting. And it's really something very simple that we can take care of, that should just be taken care of, and a lot of times gets skipped because it's just lack of knowledge.
The most talked about topic these last couple months has been the abatement.
Yep.
We just wanted to jump in with the time frame so people are aware, because there's a lot of misconception about when these things get filed.
I also think that what's really interesting, we learn a lot, and some very sophisticated developers, is not knowing that there's actually a construction or developer's abatement, which is 30 months. It gives you 30 months from the times of your permits are issued to basically have the taxes frozen on the account. No new, I'm sorry, I'm missing the word, Rachel. Assessments, no new assessments. But what's really important, what we see a lot, and what we tend to have to go fix, which could have been resolved and not had any issue, is just understanding the timeline. So within 60 days of a building permit issuance, that's when you need to get both your development abatement and then also your new construction. So what we're usually looking for, is to get a hold and be really in collaboration with the architects involved, because typically they're the ones who are going,
or contractors,
or the contractor, is going and getting and taking care of the permits. But a lot of times, it kind of falls to the wayside because they don't. That's not really their responsibility to take care of. Being aware and keeping up with your abatements, your new construction. Again, when we say new construction, we're talking about that 10-year tax abatement that has now switched. But Rachel can talk about the timelines on that. So
I think also just a lot of people don't either, maybe they're outside investors or they're outside developers, or, they think it's 1 year, for you guys in the front lines to say, hey, make sure that, because you generally know if they're going to rehab a building, if it's new construction, if they're just going to buy it as is, or if you're dealing with single family homes where you're representing a buyer and the seller is saying, yeah, we have a tax abatement on it. I mean, there's ways to check if there either is an abatement or there isn't. It's not like some magical thing that's hidden somewhere. And again, because these timelines are so stringent, if they didn't file it within the time frame, it's not on the property. Again, I'll talk through in a minute ways to fix that. But and a lot of people don't realize that you can get an abatement for improving existing structures. A lot of people think it's just new construction. If you do any significant improvement to real estate, you put on a roof deck, you put new bathrooms in, you redo a kitchen, you redo the floors.
I can't tell you how many
that all qualifies.
Yeah, and I can tell you how many people have just not done it because they didn't know. Like we always say, like if you think it's substantial, and we sat down with the former head of the OPA, and what they go with is if it's something that's going to add value when you're selling the property, it's likely under that umbrella of significant improvement. So like Rachel's saying, those places that you typically see value when you're selling a property, like remodeling the kitchen, remodeling the bathroom, they're going to likely qualify for an abatement. And there's another perfect selling point and place to make a property even more attractive. And I just want to share on that as far as timelines. If it's an existing structure, when the building permit is issued, you have to submit within the same calendar year. So like a lot of people get that confused with that 60 days. Say you do it in December, you get your building permit December 1 of 2020, you have to get that improvement abatement in by December 31st. That's it. It's not the 60 days. It's shorter, so just to be aware of that.
If you don't file it on time, you can appeal it to the Board of Revision of Taxes. I'm not going to go into when it's a good idea, when it is not. I mean, generally not knowing the filing date is not a good excuse. Again, it's important to look at time frame. But again, if you can help, your clients say, oh, you're going to put a bathroom in, make sure that, when you do that, you file for the abatement. Anytime you can mitigate paying extra property taxes, you should. Obviously, I worked for the city. We all love our city. It's great to pay taxes. It goes towards, city services and the school district. But again, if anytime you can save a client money and they're improving real estate, that's important. Again, there's a lot of mechanisms that we can utilize if people screw things up. And I'll be the most honest person to say, hey, listen, I don't really think we have a good excuse for this. We should try it. It's better than not doing it. But here's what that looks like. It also takes about 6 months to a year to even get in front of the Board of Revision of Taxes a lot of times. We've been able to shorten that sometimes, but so that's kind of goes into if it's good or not. And then again, we can still close a transaction if there's an abatement pending. A typical abatement, even if you file it on time, generally takes about 12 weeks to process it. So even if you do have that, within the 1 calendar year, for example, it's April 30th, you would have until December 31st, 2020, if you were doing, if you got your building permit today for, bathrooms or whatever, or alterations of an existing structure. Yeah. You still want to get it in as soon as possible because of how long it takes to process it. And again, we can come up with solutions if you mess up. Tax appeals are just the most important thing I want to highlight about tax appeals for realtors is that, you have to appeal the first Monday in October generally, but when you guys are working with somebody and they are just purchasing a property and it's past this October deadline, you have within 30 days of the agreement of sale to actually appeal real estate taxes. So for example, I got a call from a realtor 2 weeks ago. Hey, my client's purchasing this property at $90,000 under what the city has it assessed at. Is it worth us appealing? I said, well, here's what the cost is for us to go actually appeal it. Let's go look at the comps, or you guys are way better at telling what the comps are. Hey, tell me what the comps are for properties that are of similar conditions, similar use, similar size, and similar location, obviously on that block or nearby, and tell me what the values are. And then, yeah, if we're a $90,000 differential, and you're going to spend significantly less than that for the legal work to go do it, and we have comps that show that the real value is $90,000 less, it makes sense, and we still have time within that 30 days. So it's not, it's another value add.
I'm just going to piggyback on that because there's also the reverse, which is that people, when they think about, oh my God, it's overvalued by $50,000, it does sound like a lot, but at the same time, you have to remember it's not $50,000. It's whatever the millage rate is currently, which I think is like 1.3998 times 50,000. So ultimately, you always want to get your taxes as close to what they realistically should be, because it's going to affect years in a row. But it's always something to think about, because something being $10,000 or $20,000 over, we're talking about $200 or $300. It's not where you might end up spending $1,000 or more, just having us look into it. The other thing I wanted to quickly share on that is the best way, in your mind, to think about what the taxes should be is if there's like a recent sale. Fair market value is by far the best rationale for what what your property should be valued and what the taxes will be associated on it. So if there's a recent sale, and say your property taxes, a lot of times people come to say, oh, my taxes are too high. Well, in fact, what the city has valued and evaluated their taxes at is actually lower than what they purchased the property for. And so it doesn't make sense at that time, because, if you bought the property at that price, that's what they're going to see as well. And it's very rare, but they can technically also the board can technically also increase your taxes.
Also, for those who are not familiar with the homestead exemption, and anyone who does a lot of transactions with home buyers, it's really important that if there's not an abatement on the property, for example, if it's just an existing structure or the abatement's going to be running out, that you can apply, not while there's an abatement on it, but once the abatement's either done, or if they don't qualify for an abatement, if they're not making improvements, for the homestead exemption, which allows you to reduce your property tax assessment by $45,000, which I think is essentially $650 a month of your property tax, a year, sorry, of your property tax payment. So that's another important thing, and it's a very easy application online as well. And I don't expect everyone to remember all this, just trying to give you as much as possible. Last thing before we get into questions, we do a lot of work with subdivisions, consolidations, litigation, construction, landlord, tenant, and we're also always happy to open our Rolodex. If you need a recommendation for an architect or a civil engineer or an attorney who does personal injury work or whatever, always reach out to us. It's never a bother. And we'd rather connect you with someone we know who can deliver than have you feel like, oh my God, I'm scrapping for some random person and now I'm giving it to my client. And if it doesn't work out, at least you could then try to blame it on us. Like the Pritzkers gave us this name, but we'll always try to get you with the right people. Quick on the current status. The Eclipse system is the best way to file, is the only way to file permits and licenses right now. I think it's about 90% in good shape. Again, we do this a lot for clients. You can set up your own account if you'd like, but everything through L&I is going through the Eclipse system. It's no more sitting at the Municipal Services Building for a gajillion hours. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is closed right now indefinitely, which is extremely frustrating. But again, that feasibility analysis and being able to really say to your client, now, if you're going to go through a variance right now, know that this is kind of the climate. That's important. OPA is also closed. So if you are dealing with tax abatements, they're not going to penalize anybody. Do not mail anything in. You know, hold on to everything. You know, make sure whenever you're dealing with any of these agencies, you get everything stamped. You get a copy of everything.
Yeah,
if you spoke to someone on the phone, write an email saying, thanks for speaking to me. We talked about this. And, you know, but OPA closed and ZBA closed. We will continue to keep people updated on when that's going to change. Property taxes, they've pushed back the due date to June 15th. They've also pushed back the date if you need to do any sort of payment installment agreements. Some strategies in the meantime, again, you know, I work with people on an individual basis to assess what makes sense, but there's a lot of ways to still move projects forward. You could probably still move about 75 to 80% of projects forward. And again, it's important to be really honest, open, and transparent with your clients. And that's how we are with you guys and with anybody we deal with. So, you know, as it's a little bit of a challenging environment right now. And again, we're offering free webinars with Design Blends Architecture, who's our partner on this, every Thursday at 2 p.m. We have one today at 3 o'clock with Alan Dom, where we're going to be asking him a lot of questions about sort of how he's been handling stuff as a businessman and as a council member. And every week we provide different content, RSA 5s, RM1, do one on subdivisions and consolidations. We're going to do one on the RCO, you know, the Registered Community Organization process with variances, and any other topics that you guys think would be interesting that you get asked a lot or you want to know about. We are providing this free educational information to people and really just honestly want to be a resource to help. And we, you know, to try to also not talk about COVID every week. So that was also one of them.
Yeah. So I see one question first before we jump in.
Sure.
It's from Rodney. It says, do you guys have an idea of what the cost would be to do a tax appeal? And if it's within the 30 days of the agreement of sale, how long does the city take to have the hearing? In other words, is it realistic that a decision would be made in 30 to 60 days?
No. Hi, Rodney. No. So you have within the 30 days to actually submit your appeal. Again, it takes 6 months to a year to get in front of the Board of Revision of Taxes.
Yes. Well, let me just jump on that.
Sure.
In 2018,
I can't see the.
Sorry.
Oh,
in 2018, we had the most appeals by like almost 10,000 because of the way the city had kind of overly assessed, for lack of better terms, the taxes, real estate taxes. So to this day, we're still dealing with appeals for 2019 taxes from 2018. You know, you're talking about 12, 13, 14 months. Now, what they will do is if you're successful, and most times we are successful, because again, we don't take cases we don't feel we're going to be successful in, they will refund those taxes either as a credit on your mortgage or in a check in the event that you don't have a mortgage. But essentially, they will figure that out with your mortgage company. So while you know, the only thing you can do is keep paying your taxes to you know, just essentially stay legitimate. It will get refunded. It's just know that you may have to carry that cost for 12, even 15 months a lot of times.
Yeah, there's nothing that gets done in the city in 30 to 60 days besides parking tickets. I mean, honestly. So and again, it's important to be realistic with the time frame. We do it around $2,500. It depends. If it's commercial property, we charge more because they look at rent roll. It's a little bit more sophisticated than a typical single family or a duplex. But no, you're not going to.
You know, it can be less depending on.
I've done it. We've done it at a lot less than that.
Yeah, it just depends on. You know, a lot of times they're willing to negotiate. Most of what we do is, you know, we end up doing negotiations with the evaluators, assessors, who, you know, to try to kind of cut these things down so they don't have to see it. But essentially, you're looking at around 7 to 10 hours of time, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so to Dana's question, yeah, if you file the tax abatement paperwork for your clients, hold on to it right now. Do not mail it in. I spoke with a good friend of mine who works at OPA a couple weeks ago, and they're not working right now. So even if you were to mail it in, there's going to be nobody to get it. It'll get lost in the abyss, and just hold on to it. And again, they're not going to penalize anybody during this time. So I would just wait on it.
Yep. Okay. I'll just ask you the next question. Does the abatement apply to condo apartments within a high-rise?
Yes. It is an improvement of real estate. It doesn't discriminate on if it's a single family, if it's commercial, if it's industrial. It's just improvements to real estate. So absolutely, condos and high-rise buildings are eligible for the tax abatement. Again, it would be, that existing improvement to existing structure where you get that longer time frame. But yes.
Yeah, and I did want to just also say Rachel was talking about that the legislation and policy that allows for the homeowners to receive $45,000 deduction. Well, you can't. It's like they don't let you double dip. So if you are going for an abatement or have an abatement on the property, you cannot have that $45,000 thing. So sometimes, like Rachel's saying, you can weigh if it's a small improvement, just might not be worth actually submitting that abatement. So, and thank you, Jamie. Jamie's my stepsister, Jamie Solar, and yeah,
hi, Jamie.
Our stepdad did do my hair, so hashtag Corona cut. Sean wrote, "How do we get a link to the call today at 3 p.m.?"
I'm gonna get it for you. I'll put it in the.
And I know that was a bit confusing. We always do them at 2 p.m. Unfortunately, there was a last minute city council meeting that they were having, and so Alan pushed it to 3 o'clock. So it's always at 2 o'clock, but today is a special exception.
Where's my registration thing? I need to have it up here. Yeah, with Alan, listen, it was really funny. I was like, asked him for a couple weeks to do it, and he's like, I don't want to. I worked for him, so I push on him kind of hard. I was like, you got to do it. People need to hear from leadership. And, we've been on a lot of these other calls with people who are city officials. And I'm just feel like everyone's like texting me like, this doesn't make sense. We need answers, blah, blah, blah. So, but again, of course, last minute, 11th hour, he was like, well, we have to, now there's a council briefing. For those who are not like very involved in government, try to get a little bit involved if you can, because like a lot of the issues that we deal with don't get resolved with people outside of the industry because they just don't get what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And we have, there's a lot of good people who advocate, but if you can be informed ever so slightly, it will help you out.
And I don't think that's fair. I think it's just how it is. I give a lot of talks on tax appeals and tax assessments, and the reality is they have to say no to some people. So it's easier to say no to somebody that isn't legally represented with kind of an arsenal of experience. I don't think that's fair. A lot of my clients are very sophisticated and can do the exact same work as me. But ultimately Rachel and I, both in zoning and tax bills, have pretty much, we would argue, an completely unblemished record, and that's just because one, we only take cases that we're successful at, but the reality is that we do come with a plethora of experience. So we have a couple minutes for more. I think Rachel, if you want to put the link.
So if for anyone, I put the link down there. And
well, actually, let me get to Andrew's first.
Feasibility. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Rachel. We use this, and I just want to say we use this this is just a good starting place. So a lot of times it's a loss leader for us, essentially, and how much time we'll actually spend on it. But we want these to come in because not only does it help us in getting, possibly getting more services for you, but we just want people to be informed because ultimately you're likely going to come down the road. And if we can help you now, you'll think of us in the future. So if you want to just share what we're.
Yeah. So we charge a $375 flat fee for it, which is very inexpensive given I usually spend up to 2 hours on them. Again, to Adam's point, it's a good lead generator for us, but also, like I said, if I'm going to tell you that we should go ahead with something, I want to have spent the time to really look through strategy to make sure that we can deliver on our end. So that's what we charge. And again, it covers kind of whatever question you're asking, whether you think it's feasible, to depend on how many units. I've done an RSA 5 to RM1 conversion with Rodney as well, where him and his partner did the majority of the groundwork. So we got involved later on, but his properties that he's done are really good examples. It's the areas you pick, it's the size of the structures or the lots. And so
yep, having that knowledge is
we'll
certainly
look into that.
Yep. And then Rodney asked, we're looking at 2 triplexes next to each other in West Philly. They're zoned CMX1, but on a residential block. First floor residential isn't allowed in CMX1, right?
I got it. So is the directly adjacent properties RSA 5?
I think the whole block is this side of the block is CMX. Right across the street, it's RSA 5. It's on 40th Street. But
okay.
But they are all residential. Even though the whole block is zoned CMX, everything else in the block is just single family. They all look like they're single families or duplexes.
So for those who aren't familiar with CMX1, it's kind of like the chameleon zoning classification. I think it's awful, but basically what it does is it takes on the most restrictive residential use that it's directly adjacent to. It's very prohibitive in that way. So for example, if it was right next to RSA 5, it would take on RSA 5. So you could do single family on CMX1. You can't do a duplex. You can do 1 commercial unit and 1 residential unit. Could you do 2? Not without, again, I would want to look into this specific block that it's on, but generally it's a chameleon and kind of takes that on. CMX1 and most of the code really prohibits a lot of multifamily as of right for whatever reason. I think, those of us who have been involved with variances know kind of the climate around multifamily in a lot of these neighborhoods. But if it's a CMX commercial mixed use property, if there's a precedent for a duplex there, if the size of the structure or lot is big, it's probably a pretty ripe opportunity for a variance. But again, CMX1 is very restrictive in that way.
Okay.
Guys, I'm sorry to cut you guys off. We
Mm-hmm.
do have to close off because Vicky is starting her class at noon.
Okay.
Adam and Rachel, thank you guys so much for your wealth of knowledge. We'll be
You're
sharing
very welcome.
Adam and Rachel's info. If anyone has additional questions, I'm sure they would be happy to answer you guys privately with any specific questions. Rachel at pritzkerlg.com and Adam at pritzkerlg.com is their email. It's in the chat. Have a great afternoon, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate you guys.